Thank you for joining us for teaching that transforms to encourage and facilitate spiritual growth and maturity in your life and in your relationship with God. Today we want to talk to you about what it means for you and I to be created in the image of God. The phrase "let there be" appears in the Bible in Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 24. The chapter continues with God separating the light from the darkness, naming the light day and the darkness night, and marking the first day with evening and morning. According to the Bible, over the course of 5 days, God spoke the heavens, the earth, and the entire animal kingdom into existence with "let there be." In Genesis 1 through 3, again, it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. And then God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, and there was the first day." But on the last day of creation, God did something uniquely different from all of the creations, from everything that he created. On the last day, he did something uniquely different. He said, "Let us make man in our image and in our likeness," found in Genesis 1 through 26. What God did that was totally different from all of creation was he got personal. He finished his work with a personal touch. God formed Adam from the dust and gave him life by sharing his own breath with him, which is found in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. Going back to Genesis 1:26, "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth.'" Again, God said, "Let them have dominion over everything that he had created." Everything that he had spoken into existence, he gave his personal creation dominion and control over it. In Genesis 2:7, then the Lord God formed the man out of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. Again, God made man use special attention. He gave special attention to the creation of man because he said, "Let us," going back to that Genesis 1:26, "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image after our likeness.'" Again, God took special care in creating mankind in his image, and then again breathing the breath of his breath of life into that body to create man, to cause man to become a human being. Again, totally different from the angels and every other creation. God created man as an innocent being to live forever. Again, to live forever. Man was created in innocence to live forever, capable of interacting with God, his creator, spiritually as well as with others. Because again, God's intention was to create a society of people that loved him and worshiped him, to become part of his kingdom. Again, totally different from the angels and every other creation. A being created in innocence to live forever, capable of interacting with God, his creator, spiritually and with another in a godlike manner, We were created in the image of God to be like God in our emotional, mental, moral, and social interaction with one another. A body fit for the dominion God intended for mankind to have over the earth. Again, he said, let them have dominion over my creation. Again, a body fit for the dominion God intended for mankind to have over the earth, and also to glorify him as the creator by being a physical image of him. Created in the humanity of God by Jesus Christ through the birth of Jesus Christ by a virgin, having the characteristics of a spiritual God in our manner, our emotions, our mentality, our morality, and our sociality. Having the ability to reason and make choices, to be creative, just as God was creative when he spoke everything into existence and even created man out of the dust. Having the ability to reason and make choices, to be creative and to have compassion, to love, to socialize, and to fellowship. Again, we were created uniquely different from all of God's creation, in the image of God, from an emotional, mental, moral, and social aspect. We were created to be creative, to have compassion, to love, to socialize, and to fellowship as the image of the living God. Even though we were created in the image of God, created in an innocence, in a state of innocence, created with the purpose of living eternally, man rebelled against God in the Garden of Eden. Being made in God's image, Adam and Eve had the capacity to make free choices. Even though they were given a righteous nature, again, as I said, created in innocence to live forever, Adam and Eve made an evil choice and rebelled against their Creator God. In doing so, they destroyed the image of God within themselves and passed that damaged likeness on to all their descendants, found in Romans chapter 5 and verse 12. It was through this rebellious mindset of evil and selfishness that motivate them. Again, through a rebellious mindset and evil and selfish motivations, man rebelled against God. After being created in the image of God, we rebelled against God and shattered that image of God within our lives. Again, in Romans 5:12, it says, therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, and death through that sin, and in this way death came to all people because all sin. That's why if nothing else, when you're witnessing to people and you tell people that they need to be saved, that they need salvation, and they will come back and say, well, I'm a good person. I haven't done this. I haven't done that. What you have to get them to realize is that by being born of man, because of the Adam and Eve's disobedience in the garden, a curse of sin was placed upon mankind. Again, God created man to live forever, but because of their disobedience in the garden, mankind was placed under a curse of sin. He said, from the moment that you eat, you will surely die. As we've said before in other teachings, the aging process is a process of dying. So because of Adam and Eve's sin, and because we are the descendants of Adam and Eve, the curse of death has been passed on to each and every individual. And if a person does nothing but be born in the world, just being born in the world, And if that person never commits any other sin from the time they're born to the time they die, they still have to have the curse of death lifted off of their life. And that's the salvation that Jesus Christ offered when he gave his life on the cross. So again, if a person never commits any sin from the time they're born to the time they die, other than from the fact of being born, they are under a curse of sin that can only be lifted by their acceptance of Jesus' death on the cross for their salvation, because that's what Jesus died for, was to restore the relationship that was broken in the Garden of Eden and to lift the curse of death that was placed upon mankind. Because of the fall of mankind, because of mankind's rebellion, they ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Again, they were created in innocence, created to live eternally. When they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, then they became aware of evil and they became aware of good. It placed them in a state of having to make a choice when before they didn't have to make a choice. Out of their rebellion, and the first choice that they made, they had a choice. Let me back up. They had a choice before they ate of the fruit. They had a choice to obey God and not eat of the fruit. But when they ate of the tree, made the wrong choice and ate of the tree, ate of the fruit, then it put them into a judgment, in a state of being judged by the choices that they made. And now, as a result of that, we are living in a world filled with sin. We're living in a world filled with hate, destruction. We're living in a world that has no bearing and no semblance to what God commanded Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. He said to be fruitful, to multiply, and to have dominion over the creation, over everything that God had created. And as you look at in this picture, and if you look at the news and look at the internet, look at the destruction and the havoc that we have worked on God's creation, the havoc and the destruction that we have worked on the environment, the havoc and the destruction that we're having that's going on in people's lives through drugs and immorality. Again, a world filled with sin. Just as the curse of death came on mankind because of Adam and Eve's disobedience, a curse was placed upon the world. And now, as a result of that, again, we're living in a world filled with sin. Today, we still bear the image of God, found in James 3:9, but we also bear the scars of that sin, that initial sin, plus the scars of the sins that we're now engaged in, the sins now that we're practicing. Again, today we still bear the image of God, but we also bear the scars of that sinful mindset. Mentally, morally, socially, and physically, we show the effects of sin in everything we do, say, and think. Mentally, morally, socially, and physically, we show the effects of sin in everything we say and think, everything we do, say, and think, because of the rebellion of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden against God's will and against God's purpose for their life and against his purpose for all of mankind. Again, our topic today is we're talking about created in the image of God. What does that mean, that we were created in the image of God? Why did God take a special personal touch in the creation of mankind above the creation of everything else that he created? We were created, bottom line, we were created in God's image for a purpose. We were created with the attributes, the mindset, the innocence, the purpose of eternal life. We were created in that image for a purpose. I want to show you a video that will help you to, I think will help to try to illustrate that purpose and where we are right now in the fulfillment of that purpose. And we'll come back and talk a little bit more after we view this video.
So if you lived in ancient Bible times, odds are you lived under the authority of a king.
And many of these kings claimed that they were gods, and they would even call themselves the image of God.
Meaning they had authority to tell people what to do, order things to be made.
Yeah, they got to define good and evil. And these kings would often make statues of themselves, which in Hebrew were called tselem, often translated as idol or image.
But for Israel, they didn't view their kings as the God. In fact, they were never supposed to even make images of God.
It's exactly right, and that was really unique for that time and culture. This was rooted, first of all, in Israel's belief that you can't reduce the creator God down to any one thing in creation. But there's another reason. People aren't to make images of God because God has already made images of himself.
When did he do that?
Well, let's go to page 1 of the Bible. And the first person we meet there is God. He's the one with authority over all creation. He speaks and creation obeys, and he defines what is good and not good. In other words, he alone is king. But then surprisingly, as the pinnacle of all of God's creative work, he makes humans, and he calls all of them the image of God.
So he gives all humans the authority to rule.
Exactly, that's what he goes on to say. He tells the humans to subdue the earth and to rule it. And so this task that once belonged only to elite kings is here in the Bible the task of every human being. This was a revolutionary statement in its day because all humans are being called to rule and to participate in the human project.
So what does this mean? I mean, how are we all supposed to rule?
So the picture we get in Genesis is gardening.
Gardening?
Yes. Gardening. So they rule the earth by cultivating it, by harnessing all of the earth's raw potential and then making something more and new out of it.
So growing food for each other.
Yes, but that also includes growing families then, which become neighborhoods, and then they create communities where people are going to work and take care of each other and build businesses and cities that will expand to new places and so on.
So ruling is really the day-to-day acts of our work and creativity.
Yes, we take the world somewhere. This is humanity's divine and sacred task.
Yeah, and this all sounds really nice. And humans have designed some pretty great things. But just as often we create things that cause a lot of suffering and a lot of injustice. So maybe we shouldn't actually be ruling.
Yeah, so the Bible addresses this. In Genesis, what happens is that God gives humans a choice about how they're going to rule. So are they going to use their authority for the benefit of others, which is God's definition of good, or are they going to turn away and define good and evil for themselves and use their authority for self-advantage?
And in the story, they choose to define good and evil on their own terms.
And so this is the Bible's depiction of the human condition. So sometimes we pull off amazingly good stuff, but just as often, despite our best intentions, we act selfishly and we create evil in the world.
And so we're stuck as mediocre rulers making a mess of things.
But that's not the end of the story. So the Bible goes on and it makes this claim that all of this was resolved when God bound himself to humanity through Jesus. And he showed us what it looks like to truly rule as a human.
So what does it look like?
Well, Jesus ruled by serving and by seeking the best for others, by putting himself underneath them and loving not just his friends, but also his enemies.
And that's not a typical way to rule.
And not only that, Jesus confronted the consequences of all of the evil and the death that we have created by our messed up ways of ruling. And he takes it. I mean, he lets it kill him. And so when the New Testament writers looked back to Jesus' resurrection, they see a whole new future opening up for all humanity.
Jesus is a new way to be human.
Yeah, that's why they called Jesus the image of God, or the new human. And not only that, they also believe that Jesus' divine life and power is now available to heal and to transform us to become our life and power.
And this sounds really nice, but what does it really look like?
So practically, the Apostle Paul said it looks like people being filled by Jesus' own presence and spirit, filled with love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and integrity and gentleness and self-control. He says this is the new humanity that God wants to create in us so that we become people in whom God's image is being restored, people who will move the human project forward. And that's actually how the story of the Bible ends. It's a renewed world where God is on his throne and his servants are all around him, but they're the ones ruling over this new world, taking it into new, uncharted territory with Jesus as their healer and their guide.
Again, you are created in God's image for a purpose. Again, God got personal in the creation of man because God has got a purpose for us. He has a purpose for us, and he still has a purpose. He's got a future purpose for us. So far, excuse me, in addition to this, we're talking about created in the image of God. But up to this point, so far we have talked about, in other teachings, we have talked about foreshadows of God's kingdom plan for mankind. All throughout the Bible, God has given us foreshadows and shown us foreshadows through his interaction with his people of what his plans is for mankind. The foreshadowing of God's kingdom plans for mankind is significant because it deepens our understanding of the Bible's narrative of God's eternal plans for mankind. Again, we've talked about foreshadows of God's kingdom plans for mankind. We shared with you our reign. We talked about our reign in the millennial reign. What you do today as a believer, again, what you do today as a believer will affect what you will do in the millennium. We share it with you. Again, we're talking about God, foreshadows of God's plans for mankind. We're talking about created in God's image for a purpose. God has given us foreshadows of his plans for mankind all throughout the Bible. And we're talking with you, we've shared with you about our reign in the millennial reign. Part of God's purpose and plan for us is to reign and rule with him in the millennial reign. So we covered that, and we talked about that. What you do today as a believer will affect what you will do in the millennium, how you will reign and rule with Jesus Christ in the millennium. And that reign and rule in that teaching will take place not up in the sky, not floating around on clouds, but that reign and rule with Jesus Christ will take place right here on earth. We also covered our relationship versus religion, or religion versus relationship. You've got a lot of people that have a religion. You've got a lot of people that they believe in God. They've heard about God and they know God. But that doesn't equate with a relationship. And the Bible says that a lot of people, when they stand before Jesus in judgment, he's going to tell them to depart from him because he never knew them. What that means is You know of me, you knew of me, you believe I existed, but you and I never had a personal relationship. Again, we use as an analogy, how many of you have ever loved somebody or cared for someone deeply, but they didn't reciprocate that love? They didn't love you back. They didn't feel the same way that you did. That's what it's going to be like when God tells you to depart from me. I never knew you. And then we talked about the resurrected believer. Again, God has a purpose for us now, but God also has a purpose for us in the future. And this deals with the resurrected believer when all things become new. Again, God has got a plan for us. As I've said, and I've said it in these teachings, and I'll say it again, a lot of people only want to have something to do with God to be saved from hell. But God's plan and purpose for salvation was to save us as well as save us from the punishment of hell. But what his purpose, primary purpose, was to save us for the fulfillment of his purpose for mankind. And the reason being that he got personal in the creation of mankind. Totally unique, totally different from all of the creation that he did throughout all of creation. So I would encourage you to take a look at these videos, because what we're trying to do is to give you a timeline of events and prepare you for your participation in them, in God's purpose for mankind. Because of mankind's rebellion in the Garden of Eden, again, we were created in the image of God, which meant we had an identity with God. We were created with the mindset, the heart and the mind and the spirit of God. So we had an identity. But through mankind's rebellion in the Garden of Eden, we lost our identity. And through the loss of our identity, we have lost our way. We have lost the ability to reason and make the right choices. We've taken the creative power of God for creating good, as you saw in that video clip, and we're now using the creative mindset of God to create evil, to create war mechanisms of war and destruction. We have lost our sense of compassion, as we've seen in this last year, 2024, just in the elections and all of the chaos behind that. We've lost our compassion for one another. We've lost our love for one another. We've lost our ability to socialize and to fellowship with one another. What defined us, what made us special, and what separated us from all of God's other creations was being created in his likeness with his attributes. But we have lost our identity and we have lost our way. Through our disobedience to God, our kingdom mentality and our kingdom mandate has been altered or lost. Again, God created man and he placed him in the garden, and he said to have dominion over my creation. And dominion simply means to reign and to rule. So through our disobedience to God, we have lost our kingdom mentality and we have lost our kingdom mandate. It has been altered or totally lost. And the tragedy of this is because our identity, who you identify with or what you identify with, defines who you are. Your identity is a representation of your interests, your relationships, your social activity. Basically, your identity is how you live your life. And if you look at this picture, I think this graphically illustrates that we have lost our hope because we have lost our kingdom mentality, we have lost our kingdom mandate, and we have lost our identity of who we are and the purpose for why God created us. Again, the tragedy of this is because our identity defines who we are. Our identity is a representation of our interests, our relationships, our social activity. Again, basically, our identity and who we identify with defines how we live our lives. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, it said, "Then God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." If God created us in his image, he knew and then commanded us to have the responsibility to have dominion. He knew that we had it within us by identifying with him to have that kind of kingdom mentality and mandate. And again, this picture right here, I think, again, graphically illustrates that we have lost our hope because we have lost our identity. Again, who will you identify with, or who do you identify with? What do you identify with? Do you accept your identity with God through Jesus Christ? Or will you continue to do things your way and make the same decision and choices that you have in the past? Or will you identify with God and his plans for you now and eternally, like we showed you in that little video clip, and again, like we showed you the topics that we've talked on? God has a plan for you today, and he has a plan for you that extends into eternity. And he created you in his likeness and in his image to be a king, to co-rule with him, to reign and rule with him in his kingdom, and not to be subservient to sin and all of the results of sin. Again, we want to thank you for joining us for this teaching, and we hope that it will encourage and bless you. Because again, you were created special. You were created uniquely different from all of God's creations. You were created in the image of God to be like God. So again, I hope that this will encourage you and bless you. And we ask you to join with us as we do upcoming teachings along the line of this one, in helping you to prepare you, to helping to renew your mind, to help you to come up to that uniqueness of why God created you, as we talk further about kingdom mentality and the renewing of your mind. So until the next time, God bless you.